Ladies and gentlemen, Coldheart. We've talked about it in the past, but with Arc 3.0 in the picture now, I think it's worth revisiting. I feel like this weapon, much like other trace rifles, outside of one, kinda falls into the, yeah, it's pretty good, but why would I use it category for a lot of players. But now there is some additional synergy to be had with Coldheart after the Arc subclass update. So we'll break it down, take a look at it in PvE and PvP, and see how it's holding up here in Season 18. But let's hop into it with a quick peek at the stats and perks. Coldheart is an exotic arc trace rifle firing at 1000 rounds per minute, 101 rounds in the magazine, and a maxed out recoil direction of 100. For the stats, like most trace rifles, the aim assist value is sitting at 100. We have strong marks in range and stability, the latter of which is being boosted by the catalyst, which is also bringing the reload speed up to an acceptable range. The big drawback here is the handling at 25, which is the lowest in the weapon class. Coldheart's intrinsic trait is Cold Fusion. Basically, it shoots an arc laser that sees a damage increase with sustained damage. The exotic perk is Longest Winter. Periodically generates ionic traces when in its high damage state. And as we saw just a moment ago, the catalyst is just an intrinsic stat boost for the stability and the reload. If you've yet to acquire this weapon, it is in the general exotic loot pool, so it's simply a random drop. The exotic catalyst can be found dropping from the Strike playlist or Nightfalls, so happy hunting. And with that, moving right along to the PvE section. For Coldheart's general functionality, there's not a whole lot going on with this weapon, but it does have a few key points. Its damage does increase with sustained damage, which we'll be looking at in the damage testing section, but there is a full 1 second grace period between damage registered to keep the damage from the weapon ramping up, and this absolutely is transferable across multiple targets. And it's actually time after landing the first shot that increases the damage, rather than shots landed, because that damage is going to continue to grow, even during the grace period window. These bars that fill up on the side of your reticle, they're your indicator, and you can see them passively filling even when the weapon is not physically dealing damage. Also, when firing at its max damage potential, it will generate ionic traces. You'll see 2 if you just run up and dump the magazine on a single target, but I was able to see up to 5 when tap firing the weapon on an enemy. If you haven't seen it yet, check this video out when we're wrapped up here. It'll give you a little more context on the matter. And just something to keep in mind, this is a subclass neutral way of accessing ionic traces, so you can get that 15 to 20% ability energy bump even if you're not running arc. For the reload speeds, at base we're looking at 1.96 seconds, and with a single trace rifle loader mod equipped, you can knock that down to 1.63. For the ammo reserves, at base you can carry 505 total rounds. With a single trace rifle reserves mod equipped, you can carry 556. And if you're willing to run double reserves mods, that'll take it up to 606. So I mean, you can stock up a lot of ammo for Coldheart. And I suppose it's time we move on to the damage numbers. But do keep in mind,
PvE damage numbers are variable and will change depending on content scaling or enemy tier. This is why I try to keep all of my testing in the Conflux Lost sector on Nessus versus Carl the Colossus, to keep these damage numbers consistent and comparable from video to video.
Versus Carl, a body shot will start out dealing 1,180 points of damage, and will move up to 1,122 when firing at its max power. Crit damage starts out at 1,655 and moves up to 2,975. Both of these reflect an 80% damage increase. The time to reach max damage is about 2.73 seconds, or 40-ish rounds if you just run up and lay into the target. But as I pointed out in my Tap It In video, you can reach the max damage potential with less rounds expended, if you tap a few shots in to start, making use of that 1 second grace period window where the damage does continue to ramp up even when you're not dealing damage, and then dump the magazine. But for the max single mag damage in the standard use application, I just figured for a linear damage increase for the first 40 rounds. The math works out to about 33 more points of damage for each shot landed. And while it doesn't appear to be a perfectly linear damage increase with Coldheart, I figured this would be close enough for all intents and purposes. So damage from the 40 rounds during the ramp up period is 94,915. The remaining 61 rounds at max damage deal 181,475. That totals out to 276,390 points of damage. The time to empty I have clocked in at 6.67 seconds. That's putting the damage per second at 41,438. Which, I mean, all in all, not too bad. If you do want to explore the Tap It In method, 13 rounds in the ramp up totaled out to 31,176. Had the remaining 88 rounds all landed as crits, that would have dealt 261,800 points of damage. Altogether, that's a potential 292,976 points of damage in a single magazine. And this did take 8.47 seconds to execute, which does drop the damage per second down to 34,590, but you are getting a little better mileage out of your ammo. dealing an additional 16,586 points of damage over the base method. And I wanted to compare this against a legendary trace rifle like Hollow Denial, even giving it a 30% damage increase with killing tally times 3. Where I am kind of cheating the system a little bit and allowing transverse of steps to auto-reload the weapon so the perk stays up indefinitely. But a crit in this case is dealing 2,318. I have a 104 round magazine on this one, putting the max single mag damage at 241,072, about 35,000 points of damage light of what Coldheart was able to achieve. The time to empty I have clocked in at 6.85 seconds. Damage per second for Hollow Denial with killing tally times 3, 35,193. For my thoughts on Coldheart's performance in PvE, it's pretty good. With the strong ammo reserves, you can pocket a lot of damage with this thing. And while we are talking about sustained damage, not burst damage, the weapon all on its own carries about 1.4 million points of baseline total damage across its full ammo reserves, without a reserves mod equipped, and without any external damage buffs factored in. The damage is there, it is dealt over an extended period of time, but it is plenty capable of melting down major targets or champions after they're stunned, and if you're in a pinch and you need it for boss damage, it can step in and fill that role pretty well also. And with Coldheart you can deliver that damage from extended mid-range. We'll step it off precisely in the PvP section, but you can hang back a good bit and still put max damage on targets. Then with its higher per round damage than other trace rifles, it's a good ad clearing weapon as well. There's no big AoE damage or anything like that generated, you do have to shoot every enemy, but because of that 1 second grace period window, you can transition from enemy to enemy and keep that damage ramping up. So this is going to put down red bar targets very quick, even in scaled up content. I would recommend tapping in these shots versus ads though. It is pretty easy to blow an extra 10 or 12 rounds per target just by holding the trigger down a shade too long. Tapping the trigger does help out a good deal with the ammo economy. Then you got ionic traces supplementing your ability cooldowns. In my experience, it usually takes about 6 traces to take an ability from 0 to full. With Coldheart, provided you're tap firing the weapon, in one magazine you should be able to get 5, maybe 6. So that can go a long way in keeping your abilities off cooldown, even in a single target damage scenario. Then we also have some ARC 3.0 synergy opportunities, and while I don't get into class specific aspects or exotics in my weapon reviews, we can see some really nice benefits just from the fragments. First and foremost in my opinion, Spark of Beacons. While amplified, your ARC special weapon final blows create a blinding explosion. Since Coldheart is a good ARC ad clearing special weapon, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this fragment, leaving entire packs of enemies blinded and non-combative in certain situations. Spark of Discharge is another good one. Arc weapon final blows have a chance to generate an ionic trace. And I'll usually throw on Spark of Ions as well, giving us 3 sources of ionic traces for a ton of ability regeneration. And since we're getting so much ability energy from the traces themselves, it lets me use a well build stacking on multiple copies of Font of Might. But I'm not going to get too deep into that right now, maybe in a future video. But yeah, definitely some nice synergy to be had. Last pro I have for you, it's great in a double special weapon loadout. Now you'll probably need to throw on some trace rifle finder, scavenger, reserves mods, just to make sure that your quote-unquote primary weapon stays flush with ammo. But it does open a door to bring along a kinetic special weapon for those situations where you do want some higher burst damage. And I think the lower burst damage is probably the biggest knock against Coldheart. It does a good job of steadily melting targets down, but it does not chunk them down. So it kind of just feels like a high-powered primary weapon, but a primary weapon that can run out of ammo. And while you're less likely to with Coldheart due to the high ammo reserves count, it is still a real possibility. Then for trace rifles in general, their usability in higher end PvE content where champions are present is usually at the mercy of the seasonal artifact. If a trace rifle champion mod isn't available in a given season, like this current season, it is going to devalue the weapon in true endgame level activities, and you are committing your exotic slot to it. So other PvE preferred exotics like Arbalist, Witherhorde, Galahorn, the list goes on, need to be left behind. Is it worth it? Well, that's your call. Coldheart is a good weapon, probably better than I think most would give it credit for, but it's all going to boil down to whether you think it's good enough to find a spot for in your loadout. With that, moving over to PvP and starting out with the damage numbers. Coldheart's going to start out hitting for 17 points of damage on a crit and 13 points of damage to the body. But just like in PvE, that damage will continue to ramp up, maxing out at 22 points of damage to the body and 31 points of damage on a crit, still showing that approximate 80% damage increase. To hit the optimal time to kill of 0.67 seconds, you'll need 11 shots. 9 crits and 2 bodies will be enough to deal lethal damage. And that ramping damage is allowing for a little bit more shot forgiveness with Coldheart than other trace rifles. For the body shot time to kill, we're looking at 0.93 seconds with 15 shots landed. But if you are in a situation like quickly transitioning to a secondary target, there is a chance of realizing the weapon's full damage potential. If you can pull it off, 5 crits and 2 body shots will down an enemy guardian in 0.43 seconds. Or 9 shots to the body can deliver lethal damage in 0.55 seconds. Now, is this an extremely common in-game scenario? Not really, but the situation definitely can arise every now and then, so I figured it's at least good to have the information. Versus a couple supers. To down Agent Sparkles while cloaked in her Spectral Blade, it required 19 crits with Coldheart taking 1.16 seconds. Perfect accuracy, yes, but an extremely quick super kill. Even body shots, though, should keep you sub 2. Versus Mrs. Ironworker in a Well of Radiance. And I didn't physically count out each round required for this one, but it's roughly 40, taking 2.38 seconds of sustained crits to secure the kill. Not great, but not too bad either, considering Coldheart does have to power through both the healing and the damage resistance. For the physical range, damage fall-off does not begin until about 36 meters, which does allow it to handle a pretty wide variety of engagement ranges. For Coldheart's performance in PvP, it's okay, which is pretty much my outlook for most other trace rifles. They're okay. I mean, on paper, this thing is an absolute monster, but I never felt like it really transitioned well in-game. That being said though, Coldheart does have some selling points. As we saw in the testing, extremely good time to kill values. The optimal time to kill is right on level footing with lightweight and aggressive SMGs, high impact pulse rifles, and a few subfamilies of sidearms. But like I just said, this does have a lot better engagement range potential, performing well up close and stretching out to about 35-ish meters. And then the body shot time to kill is actually extremely good. It outpaces most other primary weapon types outside of lightweight and aggressive burst sidearms. And you're getting this out of a weapon with a strong range stat, great stability, and maxed out aim assist and recoil direction. So this doesn't really feel like a weapon that you have to fight to control. But Bungie also announced in their most recent TWAB that the effectiveness of the stability stat on trace rifles will be improved in the future. And Coldheart isn't exactly a weapon that needs it, but this should even further tone down that vertical pull. Then with Bungie extending that damage ramp grace period window to a full second a few seasons ago, it can be much easier to handle multiple targets, giving Coldheart at least a chance of hitting that maxed out damage potential and downing enemy players extremely fast. On top of that, trace rifles in general do have great hipfire accuracy. The airborne effectiveness stat at 14 doesn't sound great, but it does seem to be fairly reliable from the air. And in my experience, as soon as the weapon does hit max damage, you will see an ionic trace pop in PvP. But I do have issues with a few things as well. First, you only spawn in with 50 rounds. Theoretically, enough for 4 kills. Realistically, I only expect to see 2 out of it. If you miss a few rounds, maybe pre-fire a shade too early, or drop a few extra rounds after an enemy is already dead, it's gonna cost ya, and those do add up quick. Going hand in hand with that point, this is a special weapon with a time to kill. Most of our other special weapon types, shotguns, grenade launchers, linear fusion rifles, sniper rifles, are capable of one-shotting enemy players in some capacity. The time to kills can be very quick with Coldheart, but they are ever present. Then you have the issue of, what do you pair with it? You could go double special, but that plays a little more risky in PvP than PvE. You can definitely run into ammo issues doing that in the Crucible. But then most close to mid-range primaries do feel a bit redundant alongside Coldheart. So typically I'm just looking at longer range weapons. Bows, scout rifles, pulse rifles, high impact hand cannons, which usually do work out fine, but it just kinda limits your options. And then at least on PC, you do need very good physical target tracking to be effective with this weapon, or trace rifles in general. I remember when I used to play on console, that reticle friction provided by the high aim assist seemed to help out a good deal. On M&K, you don't get that benefit. High aim assist does provide a more generous hitbox, but no stickiness. So I mean, it is pretty much up to the player to keep that weapon perfectly on target to hit that optimal time to kill. And while some players can pull this off just fine, I'm not consistent enough to reap the high-end benefits all that often. And you gotta commit to the fight with this weapon. Keep on target, land all your shots, you'll probably come out in good shape. Slip off target and start missing shots out in the open, and you're probably dead. But all in all, I think Coldheart is a good weapon. Those who develop a good feel for it in PvP can probably find success with it. And in PvE, it does pack a lot of utility and can handle much of the game's content just fine. Is it top shelf? Is it elite? One of the best in the game? No. And that's inevitably going to keep it out of some players' hands. Some players will only use the best weapons. If it's not the best, it's garbage. Which, I mean, for true endgame content is a mindset that you kind of have to have. But for the other 99% of the game, I think Coldheart could be a very fun and effective change-up if you haven't given it a try in a while. But that's gonna do it. If you did enjoy the video, like, subscribe, share it with some friends. They're all great ways of supporting the content and the channel. Follow Ironworker814 on Twitter if you'd like to keep tabs on me over there, and comment down below if you have something to add. And with all that being said, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to check out this weapon breakdown. You guys are awesome, and I will catch you on the next one.